In the final minutes of dying, some brains show more electrical activity than they do while fully awake. Not less, more. For decades, the assumption was simple. The heart stops, the brain runs out of oxygen, and everything shuts down together, like a building losing power. Dark, quiet, immediate. But that's not what the data shows. And what actually happens instead is stranger and somehow more disturbing than a simple shutdown ever could be. In 2013, researchers recording brain activity in dying rats noticed something they didn't expect. In the seconds after cardiac arrest, instead of the brain going quiet, it did the opposite, a massive, synchronized surge of high-frequency activity, the same kind of pattern associated with heightened awareness and focused attention while alive. Not random static from a dying organ, organized, coordinated. Similar surges have since been documented in dying human brains during end-of-life care in the final minutes before flatline. The working theory is this: as oxygen drops, the brain's usual inhibitory systems, the ones that keep neural activity in check, start to fail first. And once those brakes come off, the brain doesn't collapse. It floods, which means, for a brief window, a dying brain may be less restrained than a living one. Every process that normally gets filtered, dampened, or ignored, memory, emotion, sensory input, gets processed at once, without the usual gatekeeping. But the brain doesn't lose everything at the same time. Dying isn't one switch. It's a sequence, and the order matters. Sight tends to go first. The visual system is energy-hungry and fragile, one of the earliest casualties as oxygen drops. Touch and temperature follow. But hearing is different. It's one of the most metabolically efficient senses the brain has, and multiple studies on dying patients suggest auditory processing can continue functioning after every other input has gone dark, which means in the final minutes, a person may not be able to see the room or feel the hand holding theirs, but they may still be able to hear it. This is part of why palliative care teams are trained to keep speaking to patients, even after responsiveness is gone. Not out of superstition, because the evidence suggests, for a window, someone might actually still be listening. This might explain why so many documented near-death accounts describe the same handful of things, across different cultures, different religions, different ages, a sense of time slowing or disappearing entirely. Vivid, rapid memory recall, sometimes described as a life replaying itself. A feeling of calm that doesn't match the physical situation at all. These aren't necessarily mystical events. They may be the predictable output of a brain running without its usual limits, for the first and only time. There's also the matter of what's happening chemically. In the brain's final active minutes, there's a release of compounds tied to fear suppression and altered perception. Some researchers have pointed to structural overlap with substances known to produce intense, dreamlike states in the living. The body, in its last moments, may be chemically engineered to make dying feel like something other than what it looks like from the outside. From the outside, stillness, machines flatlining, a room going quiet. From the inside, if the theory holds, possibly the most intense, least restrained experience a brain will ever produce. This gap between what's observed and what may actually be happening is something medical staff who work in end-of-life care describe constantly. Nurses and doctors who've spent years in intensive care and hospice settings report a strange, recurring pattern. Patients, sometimes hours or days from death, appear to briefly return to full clarity. They speak coherently, recognize family members they hadn't responded to in days, sometimes even sit up and hold a full conversation, before declining again shortly after. This is documented closely enough in end-of-life literature to have its own name: terminal lucidity. Nobody fully understands why it happens, but it fits unsettlingly well into the same picture. A brain that, right before the end, does something closer to a final surge than a graceful shutdown. What makes terminal lucidity especially difficult for families is the timing. It rarely arrives on schedule, and it never announces itself as the last conversation. Someone recovers just enough clarity to ask about a grandchild, or make a joke, or say something entirely ordinary. And then, often within hours, they're gone. Grief researchers have noted that this pattern can make the death feel almost like a false alarm in reverse. Hope arrives right where it shouldn't, borrowed from a process that has nothing to do with recovery. And here's the detail that should sit with you longer than the rest. This surge isn't unique to catastrophic death. Heart attacks, trauma, sudden collapse. It appears to be a general feature of how brains shut down, meaning it's not a rare glitch reserved for dramatic deaths. It may be closer to a default final process built into the biology of dying itself, waiting happening in every one of us, which raises an uncomfortable question about everyone who has ever died believing no one was listening, or that they'd already lost the ability to understand what was happening around them. If this research holds up, some of them may have understood far more than anyone in the room realized. The stillness we associate with death's final moments might be almost entirely one-directional, quiet on the outside, and, very briefly, anything but quiet within. None of this is new territory for medicine. It's just newly measurable. Physicians have been quietly noting the strangeness of the dying process for centuries, long before anyone had the equipment to record what a dying brain was actually doing. 19th century doctors wrote about patients who, moments from death, spoke with unexpected clarity or described vivid, dreamlike recollections. At the time, this was treated as anecdote, the kind of thing written off as delirium or grief or wishful thinking from families desperate for one more real moment. It's only now, with EEG data from both animal models and human patients in clinical settings, that those old anecdotes look less like folklore and more like an early, imprecise description of something real and measurable. Animal studies have added an uncomfortable layer to this. The same gamma wave surge documented in dying rats has now been observed across several other mammal studies, suggesting this isn't a uniquely human phenomenon and it isn't tied to language, culture, or belief systems that might otherwise explain it away as a psychological coping mechanism. A rat has no concept of an afterlife, no cultural framework for how dying is supposed to feel. If its brain still produces the same organized, heightened surge in its final moments, that points towards something built into the underlying biology of mammalian brains generally, not something manufactured by expectation or belief. That's part of what makes the chemical piece of this so interesting to researchers. The compounds released in the brain's final active window aren't unique to dying. They're part of the same broader family the brain uses during ordinary altered states, including deep sleep and certain naturally occurring dream states. Death, in this framing, may not switch on some entirely separate, mysterious process. It may simply be pushing existing brain chemistry to its most extreme setting, all at once, with nothing left afterward to regulate it back down. It's worth noting that long before any of this was measurable, plenty of cultures already acted as if it were true. Traditions across the world, from Jewish deathbed customs to Buddhist practices around dying, include the instruction to keep speaking calmly to someone in their final hours, regardless of whether they appear to respond. For a long time, that looked like ritual or comfort for the living rather than the dying. The data now suggests it may have been something closer to accurate instinct, arrived at without any of the equipment that eventually proved it. We spend our whole lives assuming death is the absence of experience, the final full stop, but the emerging picture is stranger than that. For a few minutes at the very end, your brain may not be shutting off at all. It may be doing the one thing it never does while you're busy being alive, running completely unfiltered one last time with no one left to explain the results to. And whoever is holding your hand in that room may be the last thing you ever fully take in.